My son and daughter-in-law saw my late husband's cherished stamp collection as worthless clutter. I saw it as a perfectly legal, $750,000 weapon. They thought they were taking advantage of a sweet old lady. They had no idea they were signing up for the most devastating tax audit of their lives. The Friday phone call came at 3:15 p.m., as reliable as a tax deadline. I was in the study, what I still called Arthur's study, surrounded by the quiet, colorful ghosts of our life together. The delicate metal of the tweezers felt cool against my fingers as I carefully mounted a pristine 1934 National Parks issue into its album page. Each stamp was a memory, a silent conversation with my late husband. The phone buzzed on the mahogany desk, and the name, Lucian, flashed on the screen. A small, tired sigh escaped my lips before I could catch it. I answered on the third ring. "Mom, hey, hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," he said, his voice a practiced blend of casual and urgent. "I'm just organizing the collection, dear. What is it?" "Listen, I'm in a real bind. A few unexpected business expenses came up. You know how it is. Claire and I are just a little short for the credit card payment this month." I could hear Claire's sharp whisper in the background, muffled but clear. "Just ask her, Lucian. Get it over with." The familiar weight settled in my chest. "How much, Lucian?" "It's just 3,000. I'll pay you back next month, I swear. Things are about to take off." The promise was as faded and worn as a common postage stamp. I looked at the album in front of me, at the vibrant block of 4 honoring the Grand Canyon, a trip Arthur and I took for our 20th anniversary. To Lucian and Claire, this room and its contents were just clutter, a dusty hoard of old people things. To me, it was the only thing left that felt truly ours. "All right, dear," I said, my voice betraying none of the ache in my heart. "I'll transfer it now." He hung up after a rushed thank you. The silence that returned was heavy, tainted, and for the first time, I felt a sharp, piercing resentment. It felt less like I was helping my son, and more like I was paying a protection fee to a stranger who just happened to have my husband's eyes. This wasn't a new pattern. It was a well-worn groove in our family dynamic, carved out over years of relentless pressure. It started small, right after Lucian and Claire got married. A loan for a new car that was never repaid. Help with a vacation they desperately needed. Then came the house. I was so proud, so happy for them starting their life, that I drained a significant portion of my savings to give them the down payment. It was a gift, freely given from a mother's heart. But instead of a foundation for their future, it became the foundation for their expectations. My generosity wasn't seen as a loving boost, but as an accessible line of credit. My pension, my savings, the life Arthur and I had meticulously built. It was all just a resource pool for their increasingly lavish lifestyle. Their social media was a glossy catalog of their spending. Michelin-starred restaurants, weekend getaways to Napa, Claire's designer handbags. They curated an image of effortless success, a fiction funded by my quiet, consistent sacrifices. The financial drain was one thing, but the erosion of my dignity was another. They treated my world, my history, with a casual, dismissive contempt. The final shred of my denial tore away last Thanksgiving. We had guests, old friends of mine, and I was showing them a rare set of Zeppelin airmail stamps Arthur had been so thrilled to acquire. Claire, swirling a glass of expensive wine I'd paid for, laughed from across the room. "Oh, Odell, you and your little squares of paper," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's 2023. Who even collects stamps anymore? If you put half that effort into a real investment, you could actually make some money." I froze, the stamp album feeling heavy and ridiculous in my hands. I looked at Lucian, hoping for a word of defense, a simple, "Claire, that's Dad's and Mom's hobby." But he just shrugged, a weak smile on his face. "She has a point, Mom. It's a bit old-fashioned." In that moment, in front of my friends, they didn't just insult my hobby. They insulted my marriage, my memories, my husband. They rendered my entire inner life worthless. The warmth of the holiday gathering turned to ice in my veins. The water in the pot had been simmering for years, and I was finally starting to feel the burn. They arrived on a Tuesday evening, unannounced. The chime of the doorbell was sharp, intrusive. I opened it to find Lucian and Claire on my doorstep, dressed in expensive-looking coats and wearing expressions of intense, manufactured excitement. They swept past me into the living room, a whirlwind of feigned affection and urgent energy. "Mom, you are not going to believe the opportunity that's just fallen into our laps," Lucian began, pacing in front of the fireplace. Claire perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes gleaming. "It's a sure thing, Odell. A boutique hotel development. A friend of a friend is a partner. We can get in on the ground floor. We've seen the projections. They're incredible." I sat down in my armchair, the one Arthur always used to sit in, and folded my hands in my lap. I knew this wasn't a social call. This was a pitch. "And what does getting in on the ground floor require?" I asked, my voice steady. Lucian stopped pacing and looked at me, his smile unwavering. $50,000, that's it. It's a one-time investment, and the return will be fivefold in 3 years. This is it, Mom. This is the big one that sets us up for life. $50,000. The number hung in the air, obscene and predatory. It was a significant piece of my nest egg, the bedrock of my security. "Lucian, that's not pocket money," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "That's my security. The money Arthur and I set aside to ensure I would never be a burden to anyone in my old age." Claire's smile tightened, the first crack in her polished facade. "A burden? Odell, we're talking about an investment that benefits the whole family. We're not asking for a handout. I cannot take that kind of risk with my retirement fund," I stated, my decision made. That's when Claire's composure shattered. Her face, moments before wreathed in smiles, twisted into an ugly sneer. She stood up and pointed a perfectly manicured finger towards the closed door of the study. The money is sitting right in there gathering dust," she snapped, her voice rising. "For God's sake, Odell, sell those useless stamps. They're just paper. They're not doing anything for anyone. Why are you hoarding them when they could be used to build a real future for your son, for your grandchildren?" She took a step closer, her eyes cold and hard. "Stop being so selfish. This is about our family's future." Selfish. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. It echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. Selfish? After all the years, all the checks, all the swallowed insults and overlooked cruelties. I, who had given and given until my own future felt thin and precarious, was being called selfish by the two people who had taken the most. In that instant, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, messy shatter, but a clean, silent fracture. The grief, the hurt, the desperate maternal love, it all fell away. I looked at my son and his wife, and for the first time I didn't see family. I saw predators. I saw two people looking at my life, my memories, and my last remaining treasures, and seeing only a dollar amount. The mother in me died in that moment. But the auditor, the woman who had spent 30 years finding truth in columns of numbers, had just been resurrected. I don't know how long I sat there after the front door slammed shut, the sound echoing the final closing of a chapter in my life. The house was utterly still. The word *selfish seemed to have sucked all the warmth out of the air. I walked, not to my bedroom to weep, but to the study. I ran my hand over the leather-bound albums, the legacy of a shared love with a good man. For a moment, a wave of profound grief washed over me, but it wasn't for the son I had lost. It was for the mother who had tried for so long to believe he still existed. And then, something else took its place. The grief receded like a tide, leaving behind the hard, unyielding bedrock of my former self. The fog of emotion cleared, and the world snapped into sharp, analytical focus. For 35 years, I was Odell Harris, senior tax auditor for the IRS. I didn't deal in feelings. I dealt in facts, figures, and the unassailable logic of legal code. The heartbroken mother was gone. The auditor was back at her desk. The next morning, I didn't call my friends to vent. I called David Chen, my late husband's estate lawyer. David was a calm, meticulous man in his 50s who had known Arthur and me for years. "David, it's Odell," I said, my voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was the voice I used to use when beginning a formal inquiry. "I need a service. I require a full, legally binding appraisal of my husband's philatelic collection. I need the best, someone whose valuation would be unassailable in a court of law or by the IRS. There was a brief pause on the other end. David was sharp. He heard the shift in my tone. He didn't ask why or are you okay? He simply said, I know just the person. I'll make the arrangements. A week later, a quiet, bespectacled expert spent 6 hours in my study. His silence punctuated only by the soft rustle of glassine paper and low murmurs of appreciation. 2 days after that, David called me into his office. He slid a bound document across his polished desk. I opened it. The final page contained the number. Fair market value, $750,000. I stared at the figure, not with shock or elation, but with a cold, grim finality. It was the number that would define everything that came next. It was the value of my husband's passion, the value of my memories. And it was the ammunition I now held. It's a significant asset, Odell, David said gently, watching my face. Yes, it is, I replied, looking up from the report. David, I want to gift it to my son, all of it. I want you to explain the federal gift tax laws to me again. Specifically, my obligations as the donor regarding Form 709. He leaned forward, his professional curiosity piqued, as he detailed the process. The lifetime exemption, the donor's responsibility to file and pay the tax, the critical importance of declaring the gift at its full fair market value. I listened intently. A plan, precise and devastatingly simple, crystallized in my mind. It was a plan built not on emotion, but on the immutable, unforgiving architecture of the United States tax code. The following Monday, I made the call. Lucian, I said, my voice measured and calm. I've been thinking about your proposal. I've been thinking a lot about our family's future. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. I can't give you the cash you asked for, but you were right. It's time for my assets to do more than just sit in a dusty room. I've decided to give you and Claire my entire stamp collection. It's yours. Do with it what you will. The explosion of joy on the other end of the line was almost pathetic. He gushed. He praised my wisdom. He promised this would change everything for them. Claire got on the extension, her voice syrupy sweet, thanking me profusely for my incredible generosity. They thought I had finally caved, that their pressure had worked. They had no idea they were enthusiastically accepting the bait for a trap they had designed themselves. We need to do this properly, I said, cutting through their excitement. This is a significant transfer. We'll meet at my lawyer's office on Tuesday afternoon to sign the paperwork. The mention of a lawyer only seemed to thrill them more, as if it legitimized the scale of their impending windfall. On Tuesday, in David Chen's quiet, wood-paneled conference room, the final act began. I had the collection with me in its custom-made, humidity-controlled cases. Lucian and Claire barely glanced at them, their eyes fixed on the documents David laid out on the table. This is a deed of gift, David explained in his calm, professional tone. It confirms that Odell Harris is gifting the entirety of the Arthur and Odell Harris Philatelic Collection to her son, Lucian Harris, effective today's date. They didn't ask a single question about the collection itself, not its history, its contents, or its meaning. Their greed was a palpable force in the room, blinding them to everything but the perceived cash value. They eagerly signed their names, their signatures a flamboyant scrawl of triumph. I pushed the heavy cases across the table to Lucian. He accepted them with a broad, victorious smile. After they left, giddy with their prize, I remained seated. David slid another set of papers in front of me. It was IRS Form 709, the United States gift and generation-skipping transfer, tax return. Are you certain, Odell? He asked one last time, his gaze steady. I picked up the pen. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I filled out the form with the meticulous precision of my former profession. Donor, Odell Harris. Recipient, Lucian Harris. Description of gift, 1 complete philatelic collection. And in the column for date of gift and value at date of gift, I wrote the truth. Value, $750,000. I signed the form, my signature as neat and resolute as the closing of a ledger. David notarized it, and we prepared it for certified mailing to the IRS. I had fulfilled my legal and financial obligation as the donor. The gift was made. The tax was declared. The bomb was set. Lucian and Claire operated with the predictable haste of the ignorant and the greedy. The concept of due diligence was as foreign to them as the idea of gratitude. To them, the stamp collection wasn't a curated historical artifact. It was a pile of lottery tickets they were desperate to cash in. They didn't consult an appraiser or a reputable auction house. That would have taken time and, in their minds, would have meant sharing the profit. Instead, Lucian found a buyer through an online marketplace, a self-proclaimed collectibles dealer who likely sensed his desperation from a mile away. Without negotiation, without a second thought, Lucian sold the entire collection, the culmination of my husband's life's passion and my last tangible connection to him, for a lump sum of $60,000. He boasted to me on the phone that he'd managed to liquidate those old things so quickly and efficiently. He thought he was a genius. He had no idea he'd just been fleeced, selling a masterpiece for the price of a cheap print. The $60,000 vanished as quickly as it had arrived. There was no boutique hotel investment. That was, as I'd suspected, a complete fiction. The money was immediately funneled into financing the lifestyle they felt they deserved. A 2-week tour of Italy, documented with insufferable detail on social media. A new luxury SUV for Claire. A down payment on a boat membership. They were living their best life, completely unaware that they were dancing on a financial volcano. Months passed. The seasons changed. I settled into a new, quieter rhythm. And then came April. Tax season. One evening my phone rang. It was Lucian, but his voice was different. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy panic. "Mom, I got a letter from the IRS. "Oh," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Is there a problem?" "A problem. It's a disaster, they're saying. It's insane. They're talking about undeclared assets, penalties, interest. The numbers, Mom, they're astronomical. It's some kind of mistake. It has to be." I could hear the rustle of paper as he fumbled with the letter. The official notice had arrived. The gift I had declared at its true value of $750,000 had created a permanent, unignorable flag on his financial record. His hasty, poorly documented sale for a fraction of that value, combined with his failure to properly account for this massive influx of assets on his own tax filings, had triggered the full, terrifying force of an IRS audit. The letter in his hand wasn't a mistake. It was a bill. A bill for his own ignorance, greed, and disrespect, calculated with cold, mathematical precision by the very system I used to serve. The tax bomb, planted nearly a year ago, had finally detonated. They were at my door within the hour. The doorbell didn't chime. It was jabbed repeatedly, a frantic, desperate sound. I opened it to a scene of complete unraveling. Lucian's face was pale and blotchy, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and rage. Claire stood beside him, her face a mask of tear-streaked makeup and disbelief, clutching a sheaf of official-looking papers as if they were a venomous snake. They stormed past me into the living room, a tempest of chaos and accusation. "What did you do?" Lucian screamed, whirling to face me. He shoved the IRS letter into my face. "This is because of you. You set me up. A tax bill for over $200,000. Penalties, interest. What the hell did you do?" Claire began to sob, a theatrical wailing sound. "She ruined us, on purpose, all because we wanted to build a better life. How could you be so cruel? You're his mother." I let their storm break around me. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I walked calmly to my armchair, the one they had last seen me in when they called me selfish, and sat down. I waited until their initial fury had crested and subsided into ragged, panting breaths. Then I looked at Lucian. My gaze was not maternal. It was the gaze of an auditor looking at a fraudulent return. "I did exactly what I told you I was going to do," I said, my voice cutting through the tension with chilling clarity. "I gave you a gift. I transferred my most valuable non-cash asset to you. A gift, Lucian, that was professionally appraised at $750,000. The color drained completely from his face. Claire stopped crying and stared at me, her mouth agape. "700, what?" Lucian stammered. $750,000, I repeated, enunciating each word. As the donor, I was legally obligated to file a gift tax return, Form 709, declaring that exact value to the Internal Revenue Service. I even absorbed the tax liability myself as a final act of generosity. My legal obligations in this matter are fulfilled and impeccably documented. I leaned forward slightly. I gave you a masterpiece. You sold it for the price of the frame because you were too greedy and arrogant to find out what you were holding. That is your failing, not mine. You then failed to properly declare your financial activities to the IRS. That is your crime, not mine. I stood up, the full weight of my decision settling into a calm, unshakable resolve. I walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cool evening air sweep into the overheated room. The letter from the IRS is addressed to you, Lucian. The debt is yours. The consequences are yours. My gift is given. My duty is done. Now please leave my house. The months that followed were the quietest I had known in years. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful, clean. I sold the large house, the stage for so much of their drama and my quiet suffering. It was liberating to watch another family's moving truck pull into the driveway. I bought a modern, sun-drenched condominium on the 7th floor of a new building, with a balcony that overlooked a lush city park. The space was smaller, more manageable, and entirely my own. With the proceeds from the sale and the savings I no longer had to protect from my son, I built a new life. I heard about Lucian and Claire through David Chen, who had seen their names on a public filing. Unable to pay the staggering tax bill and the cascading penalties, they had been forced to declare personal bankruptcy. The luxury SUV was repossessed, the boat club membership was canceled, and they had to sell their house to cover their debts. Their carefully constructed world of appearances had crumbled into a pile of legal documents and public shame. When David told me, I felt no surge of satisfaction, no bitter taste of victory. There was no lingering grief, either. It was the feeling an auditor gets at the end of a long, exhausting case. I had identified a profound liability, a non-performing asset that was draining my resources and poisoning my balance sheet. And I had dealt with it. I simply closed the file in my mind, writing off a bad debt that had been on my books for far too long. This morning, sunlight is streaming into my new living room. On my coffee table isn't an old stamp album, but a travel guide for Switzerland. I'm planning my first solo trip abroad, a journey to a land of pristine mountains and exquisite postage. It's a trip for me, funded by me, to celebrate a life that is, finally, my own. My ledger for the first time in decades is clear. It's perfectly, beautifully balanced.